Welcome to the Midnight Dreary, your rest stop on the highway of the unexplained. Pull up a bar stool and grab a drink as we present tonight's episode. And here's your host, Justin Wood.
Thank you guys so much for coming back this week and joining us here at the Midnight Dreary, your rest stop on the highway of the unexplained. I am your host, Justin Wood, and this is our first episode post-Halloween. Wishing and hoping everything went as successful as possible for you guys with little trick-or-treaters. Hope you enjoyed the holidays and handing out candy or however you celebrated. But the spookiness doesn't stop just because we've passed October 31st. We're still going to carry on and give you some spooky stories. And before I get into the main topic tonight, let's talk about the power of fear. Do you think someone could be scared to death? Obviously, absent any medical conditions, is it possible to be a victim of your own fear? Well, there's an interesting story. Read this years ago. This is from American Anthropologist, the new series, April and June 1942. While he was in the Congo in 1682, the Italian missionary Father Jerome Marola de Sorrento heard a curious story demonstrating the sometimes fatal effects of superstitious fear. During a journey, a young black man had spent the night at a friend's house, and in the morning, the friend had prepared a wild hen for breakfast. This was a food that young people were forbidden to eat by inviolable tribal custom, and the visitor asked his friend if the dish he had prepared really was a wild hen. The host replied that it was not, and the young guest ate a hearty breakfast. A few years later, the two men met again, and the friend asked his former guest if he would eat a wild hen. No, he said, that was impossible. He had been solemnly warned by a magician never to eat the food. The friend laughed and asked why he should refuse to eat the dish now when he had been perfectly happy to eat it before. As soon as the guest learned the truth about the breakfast his host had once served him, he began to tremble violently and within 24 hours was dead, the victim of his own fear. So is the belief in a curse or a tribal custom, is that enough to kill someone? Well, here's another one from Science Digest, August 1976. On a Friday the 13th, perfect for our 13th episode by the way, in 1946, a Georgia midwife was called upon to deliver 3 babies in the same area of the Okefenokee Swamp. For some malevolent reason, the woman put a curse on all 3 of the infant girls. She said that one would die before she was 16 years of age, another would be dead before she reached 21, and the third would not live to see her 23rd birthday. The first 2 predictions were violently accurate. One girl at 15 was in a fatal automobile accident. The second was killed by gunfire in a nightclub brawl the night before her 21st birthday. 2 years later, in 1969, the third young woman asked to enter a Baltimore hospital, declaring hysterically that she was doomed to die before her 23rd birthday, which was only 3 days away. Although there was apparently nothing wrong with her physically, she was obviously under great emotional stress and was admitted to the hospital for observation. The next morning, just 2 days before the fateful date, the girl was found dead in her bed, the victim, evidently, of her belief in the power of the midwife's curse. Believing in a curse or any intense psychological stressor can potentially lead to a phenomenon known as psychogenic death or voodoo death. This concept is based on the idea that extreme fear or stress can trigger a cascade of physiological responses. Stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol flood the body, leading to changes in heart rate, blood pressure, and other functions. In some cases, this can culminate in severe consequences, including death. Now, while there are anecdotal reports of such cases, they are rare and not well documented in a systematic scientific manner. Other factors like pre-existing medical conditions, genetic predispositions, and environmental stressors can also contribute to such outcomes. Cultural beliefs do play a role in shaping people's perceptions of curses and the potential effects of those. In some cultures, the belief in curses and their associated psychological impact can be quite powerful, as you've heard in these 2 stories. So what do you think about the idea of being scared to death? Have you ever heard of a case like this? Do you have an experience or something in your community that you know? If you do, share it with us here at the Midnight Dreary at yahoo.com. And on to our main story tonight, the focus of this podcast. Let's venture deep into the heart of cryptozoology and explore the intriguing world of mysterious black cat and panther sightings. These have captivated communities across the Southeast, and I've had a couple of family and friends swear they have seen a large, mysterious black cat cross the road, and all of these have taken place in the same area. Now, black cats and panthers have always held a place in folklore, entwined with superstitions and tales of the supernatural. But what if these legends are more than a kernel of truth? What if these enigmatic creatures actually roam the dense forest of the Southeast, including Alabama, where the sightings I'm talking about have taken place? Reports of the shadowy feline figures have flooded in from all corners of the region, from the murky swamps of Louisiana to the mist-covered mountains of North Carolina. Witnesses recount their encounters with awe, and they describe the creatures that seem to defy explanation as panther-like, slinking across the road with a long tail. So this past weekend, a close friend of mine reminded me that he had a sighting about 10 years ago. He said he was driving to work one morning, and he slowed down as he saw a large black cat slink across the road towards the woods on the other side. I asked him, how big was it? And he said it was at least 1 lane wide, which is about 10 feet. And it had a really long tail. Now, he's an avid outdoorsman, a longtime hunter, and he's shot some big game in his day. So I believe he saw something. Well, even stranger, his father, who also shares the same outdoorsman background, also saw the creature on 2 occasions. And he told me the same thing. It was in the same area. It was earlier in the morning, and he saw it slink across the road. And he said it was about the same size. So these 2 gentlemen, these are stories they're telling me. I believe they saw something. Well, another family member, when I was talking about this story, said the same thing. And I asked, okay, how big was it and where'd you see it at? And astonishingly enough, she said she saw it in the same area that they were talking about. So did they all see a black cat, a black panther? What did they see out there? Well, apparently there was a flood of other sightings, and most of these occurred around 2014, enough outside of Birmingham, Alabama, that the Alabama Department of Conservation actually weighed in on it, and you can find the transcript of what they said on Outdoor Alabama. But let's read what wildlife biologist Mitchell Marks had to say. Alabama has 2 native cats. The first and largest is the mountain lion, also called a cougar, catamount, painter, puma, or panther. Cougars are tawny brown to grayish in color, weighing from 75 to 120 pounds and can reach a length of about 6.5 feet, nose to tail. The population, if it still exists, is scarce within the state. The bobcat is the other native cat found in Alabama. It's a much smaller cat with a short tail, spotted fur. Adult body weights normally range from 25 to 30 pounds. Despite its small size, it is a formidable predator. However, neither of these cats have a black or melanistic color phase. So, with no native black cats in Alabama, what are people reportedly seeing? Almost all of the reports are proven to be cases of mistaken identity, or possibly animals that have been released or escaped from captivity. Some field investigations have found distinct tracks and are bite marks. Further investigations have revealed the tracks and bite marks match those of canines, not felines, so the culprits are many times coyotes or dogs. It is suspected that some large cats may have been released from captivity, which could account for some sightings. Most people aren't prepared to take care of a cat that weighs over 100 pounds, and when they're overwhelmed by their size, care requirements, and the chance of being caught by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the agency responsible for governing exotic animals, some people may begin to look for ways to get rid of them. So the animal is released into the wild. Unexplained disappearances of large cats have even happened within individuals permitted to possess these animals. How much this actually happens, we may never know. It is a potential reason why some people have reported seeing large black cats or black panthers in Alabama. After reviewing trapping and hunting records dating back to the 1600s and reports of vehicle collisions with animals from around the state, we can say with relative assurance that there are no native black cats in Alabama. However, if you do think you see such a creature, try to preserve the tracks by placing a bucket over them and take photographs. You will then want to contact a representative of the Division of Wildlife and Freshwater Fisheries for further investigation. Okay, so to me that's a reasonable, logical response. They didn't completely say it can't happen, but the likelihood would be an escaped zoo animal or pet that became overwhelming, because they were talking about the size of the native cougar at 6.5 feet. My friend and his eyewitnesses, and as we all know, eyewitness accounts can be exaggerated, or you're seeing it so quickly, struggling to remember the details. That can happen. 6.5 feet for a very large cougar from tail to nose. Not quite the 10 feet that we're talking about, but still a very large animal. So let's take a look at another suspect, the Florida panther. There's a small population in southern Florida, and these guys' total length can be up to 7.2 feet. Up to 160 pounds for the males. That's a big old cat there. And again, that's large. It's not 10 feet large, but that's still a big cat. And what's interesting about these animals is that they've actually been caught before in the state of Georgia. In 2008, a Georgia man was sentenced to 2 years probation, fined, and handed a lifetime hunting ban for killing a Florida panther that had walked 600 miles north to Troup County, Georgia. 6 years later, in 2014, a male panther was shot and killed in the Okefenokee Swamp in Georgia. Shout out to the Okefenokee Swamp. Once again, we had discussed it briefly in our midwife tale. Who thought we would get 2 Okefenokee Swamp references in one episode? That was not planned. So it's possible you've got a Florida panther that had walked 600 miles north, but this is still straddling the Florida-Georgia line. Would they go further to that? Would you get them in the Carolinas? And would you get them in Alabama? Would you get them in northern Georgia? Would you get them in Mississippi? Also, if you take a look at the Florida panther, they have a really light brown coat, and they are lacking and do not have the black coat that everyone is seeing when they make these reports of the black panthers. But there's another alternative, and this is the way I tend to lean with these sightings. I think the animal could be a jaguarundi. And if you've never seen one of these guys, Google jaguar and add UNDI. They're jaguarundis, native to South America, and they are pretty populous down there. There is a small, if not already extinct, subspecies called the Gulf Coast jaguarundi, and these guys can be black, red, light brown. But if you look at the tail, which tends to be a telltale sign of a jaguarundi, no pun intended, it's long, almost as long as the length of their body. So they're not quite as big. In fact, they're significantly smaller than a jaguar or a cougar. You're looking at 30 pounds, and maybe with the tail, 4.5, maybe a big one, 5 feet long to include the tail. But looking at some of these photos, they're black in some of them. They have the long tail. They've got that low profile where it looks like they would slink across the road. And there are populations near Texas, and likely people have owned them as pets before. If you Google jaguarundis as pets, there's a pretty active trade or market where people will buy them and keep them as pet, likely released. I just looked at an email, and a gentleman in northern Massachusetts had seen what appeared to be a jaguarundi on his security camera. He emailed the Big Cat Rescue, one branch of them. I'm sure there's many of those. But reading the email, their suspicion is he's 90% right, just based on the body type and the size, and it's likely an escaped pet. So I agree. If you Google that and look up jaguarundi on security camera, you will see that these guys are really long. The tail is striking. They can be extremely dark in color and have that black coat. And I think that this is what people are seeing. Escape pets or local population, I'm not sure. They don't quite reach the reported length, but let's be honest. Self-reporting on measuring when you're driving or in a car is not the best barometer. It's not a good gauge. If you're looking and you see something that's significantly bigger than a house cat, that you're used to probably seeing much more often. We don't have many other big cats active in Alabama, and so you're probably not seeing them ever in your life. You always see house cats. If you see something a lot bigger than that, and you see it quick in the morning, I can absolutely understand why the perception, you're going to think it's a lot bigger than it may be, because you're like, wow, that's a heck of a lot bigger than a house cat that I normally see. So I'm curious, what do you guys think is out there? I believe the sightings. I believe the people. I believe the reports enough to trigger a response from the Department of Conservation gives a lot of credence to that. Do I believe it's a mysterious Black Panther hiding out there? I believe it's something to that extent, but I believe it's a little more benign in truth. Maybe an escaped pet jaguarundi. These guys can also live up to 15 to 18 years. So if it's one that's had a healthy diet of rats, rodents, reptiles, birds, and they're in the woods here, in this all over the South, I could see them living that significant lifespan and multiple sightings occurring. So tell me not only about the Black Panther sightings, if you have those in your state, the big black cats crossing the road, caught on trail cams, tell me if you have them in your state, but also if there's any other figures in cryptozoology or cryptids in your native area, let me know at the Midnight Dreary at yahoo.com. And as always, thank you for joining us this week on the Midnight Dreary, your rest stop on the highway of the unexplained. Whatever podcast platform you listen to us on, please subscribe, give us a rating, and stay tuned for the next couple of weeks. I'm going to start a series doing the top 3 haunted, creepy places in each state here in the United States. And I've got a lot of other fun, creepy things in the works. So even through Thanksgiving and Christmas, and as we enter a new year, it'll still feel like Halloween all year long around the campfire here at the Midnight Dreary. Have a great week, guys, and we'll see you soon.
Dreary. We'll be open again next week to serve up more drinks and more mysteries. Until then, safe travels.